to Her Remarkable History, and remember to support, subscribe. The brutal and sadistic torture of Anne Askew. Anne was born to a knight, Sir William Askew, and his wife, Elizabeth Wriothesley, in the year of 1521. Anne was one of 5 children born to the noble family in Lincolnshire, and went on to receive a good education from a series of home tutors. Anne's older sister Martha was set to marry Master Kyme, but when Martha unexpectedly died, to save money, Anne was offered up as a replacement, much to her dismay. But Anne, she did her duty, and she and Kyme married and went on to have 2 children. But Anne's way of showing that she was unhappy and disagreed with the match was this: she refused to take his surname or even refer to him as her husband. Anne had been taught to read as a child, so she read and reread the Bible. Anne then, through all of her learnings, developed a love of teaching evangelicals. And not being shy or scared to speak her mind, Anne shared her views with her husband and neighbours, but neither were happy with her talk. Lincolnshire was to be at the centre of the pilgrimage of grace, and it was a conservative place. It was diverse, and when Anne proposed to the people that she wanted to read the Bible there, they soon let the bishop know of their outrage. But the law changed in 1543, meaning that Anne would get to read their Bible, but as the Act in Advancement of Religion states, only in private. Only one priest made his thoughts known to Anne, but she claimed that she was unimpressed with his outburst, and therefore she could not remember what he had said to her. Anne, it seems, was in a very unhappy marriage, and Kyme was not rumoured to be a very nice person. So, when the Reformation came about, Anne used this as a chance to seek a divorce from Kyme. From her reading of the Bible, she believed that she had the right to divorce her husband. For example, she quoted St. Paul, "If a faithful woman have an unbelieving husband, which will not tarry with her, she may leave him." But Kyme, he grew tired of Anne and her belligerence, and took the advice of a local priest. Much to Anne's pleasure, he kicked her out of their home. Anne, with great excitement, took the opportunity and headed to London. She used the opportunity to try and seek an audience with the king to request the divorce, but her request was denied, and documents show that a spy was assigned to keep a close eye on her behaviour. There in London, she would then spread the word of the Protestant Bible. But because King Henry VIII ruled that any man or woman of anything lower than the lower of high-class society would be breaking the law if they read the Bible, and thus this made for someone to stand reciting the Bible for the ordinary people to be a heretic. But Anne would not be fazed, and there was no other way. She attended secret Bible meetings in London, and her next step would to be to listen to what the people of London wanted, and they wanted to hear Anne, so she felt duty-bound to deliver. Anne was an amazing gospeller, and people flocked from miles around to hear her. Protestant texts were read, and the public were in awe, enamoured that a woman of such high ranking would come to the streets and give herself to the poor. She soon earned the name the Fair Gospeller, and became somewhat of a Tudor celebrity. Anne knew that she was breaking the law, but the rebel that she had grew to be just didn't care, as her need to share the teachings of the Bible meant more. At some point, Anne found that she was arrested and informed that her divorce request had been turned down. But after her arrest, she escaped and soon returned to her passion in London. Anne was now starting to gain attention from people that wanted to do her harm because they didn't like what she stood for. One of these was a man called Stephen Gardiner. He was a trusted politician, and he didn't like that Anne was educating the poor with Protestant text. And he felt the only way to put an end to it would be to put an end to her. And Stephen also did not like Catherine Parr, Henry's 6th and final wife. She was also well educated and a devout Protestant, and Stephen thought that he could find a way to kill two birds with one stone. It seemed that both Anne and the Queen had a mutual friend, a noble woman called Catherine Brandon, and Stephen, seeing the connection between the two women, decided to use it to his advantage. Catherine Parr managed to get one step ahead and burn all of her Protestant texts, but Anne wasn't so lucky. She was arrested and taken to the Tower of London. She had been found with a book written by John Firth, a Protestant priest who was previously killed at the stake for heresy. She was interviewed by Edmund Bonner, the Bishop of London, who had obtained the nickname of Bloody Bonner because of his ruthless persecution of heretics. There she was questioned and asked to name all the other women heretics that she knew of, but Anne stayed silent. It was customary in Tudor England, when a prisoner was being questioned, to show a man being tortured and threaten that it would be them next if they did not comply. But because Anne was of high birth and a woman, where it was illegal to torture women in the Tower, it was deemed inappropriate. So unfortunately for Anne, Stephen decided to cut out the middle part and Anne was put on the rack. Anne was eventually condemned to be executed by burning, but she had not implicated the Queen, and Stephen needed this to happen. Anne had decided to write about her time in the Tower and explained that she was tortured on the rack. She explained that she was stripped down to her shift before being tied to the device. She was then stretched until she was taut and raised 5 inches from the table. Anne then explains that she passed out from the pain, but once revived, the whole ordeal was repeated twice more. Anne's torture, it seems, was too much for one man to bear. The Tower constable ran to the king to demand the torture stopped. But the 2 men that ordered the torture were Stephen Gardiner's right-hand men, Tom Worthley and Richard Rich. Both ignored the request to end the suffering and instead decided that if the torturer wouldn't torture, then they would do it themselves. The pain and suffering and violence was only put to an end when Anthony Kingston, the Tower's constable, returned with a royal demand. According to Askew, "Then they did put me on the rack, because I confessed no ladies or gentlemen to be of my opinion. The Lord Chancellor and Master Rich took pains to rack me with their own hands, till I was nearly dead. I fainted, and then they recovered me again. After that I sat 2 long hours arguing with the Lord Chancellor. Upon the bare floor, with many flattering words, he tried to persuade me to leave my opinion. I said that I would rather die than break my faith." Anne was the only woman to have been tortured in the Tower, and she did not name a single other soul as an accomplice. Through her bravery and ability to stay silent, the Queen and her ladies were released as there was no evidence. No other woman had been tortured in the Tower of London due to the law, and some historians believe that Anne was tortured due to a sadistic or sexual reason, or just maybe because she was seen as a way to rid of the Queen. Anne was then held at Newgate Prison to await her execution. And then, on the 16th of July 1546, Anne was put to death by being burnt at the stake. Thousands flocked to witness the burning of the fair gospeller. But poor Anne had endured so much pain and injury due to the torture that she could no longer stand. Her body had been stretched so much that her tendons had snapped, her wrists, ankles, elbows, hips and knees had dislocated, and her muscle fibre had been stretched beyond repair. Anne, therefore, to be put to death by burning, had to be carried out on a chair. She was then transferred to another chair, where she was tied down with chains and attached to a wood pile, which was then set alight. But to make it worse, and with the aim of causing as much pain as they could, the fire was set to burn as slowly as possible. It is even thought that someone took pity on Anne and covered her in gunpowder to ensure a swift death, but other accounts report that the fire burned for over an hour. The only consistent report is that Anne, the brave warrior that she was, maintained her dignity and her courage until the very end. At the time of her death, a ferocious thunderstorm hit London, and many believe this to be a display of God's wrath for the murder of innocents. John Bale wrote that, "Credibly I am informed by various Dutch merchants who were present there, that in the time of their suffering, the sky and the abhorring so wicked an act suddenly altered colour, and the clouds from above gave a thunderclap, not unlike the one written in Psalm 76. The elements both declared wherein the high displeasure of God for so tyrannous a murder of innocents." It is not known if Anne and the Queen had ever met, or if that they were both in the secret Protestant club that Stephen said. But it is true that Anne's story is hard-hitting. It is the saddest yet most empowering in Tudor history. She stood up for what she believed in, and in the Victorian times she was remembered as a martyr, and even a doll was commissioned of her. The Anne Askew doll, complete with a rack and a chair. One of these dolls can be found in the Toy Museum in Leeds. The last to die a martyr under the reign of King Henry VIII, Anne Askew was only 25 years old, and after her execution, Stephen Gardiner had a meeting with King Henry and raised concerns about his wife, the Queen, Catherine Parr. He stated that he had concerns about her religious beliefs and eventually got Henry's permission to arrest her and her 3 leading ladies-in-waiting. Henry then went to see Catherine to discuss the accusations, but Catherine, being quick-witted, replied, "In this and all other cases, to your Majesty's wisdom as my only anchor, supreme head and governor here in earth, next under God." He reminded her that in the past she had discussed these matters. Catherine had an answer for that too. She had disputed with Henry in religion, and she said principally to divert his mind from the pain of his leg, but also to profit from her husband's own excellent learning, as displayed in his replies. Henry replied, "Is it even so, sweetheart, and tendered your arguments to no worse end? Then perfect friends we are now again, as ever at any time there heretofore." The next day soldiers arrived to arrest Catherine and her ladies, but Henry told them that he had changed his mind and sent them away. Anne Askew leaves behind a legacy, and she shall not be forgotten. She wrote a first-person account of her ordeal and her beliefs, which was published as The Examinations by John Bale, and later in John Fox's Acts and Monuments of 1563, which proclaims her as a Protestant martyr. Anne, a promise of a bright future, taken away by the death of her sister, and then an arranged marriage to a man she did not like or love. Anne found comfort and happiness preaching the Bible to the people, but at 25 her precious life was taken away in a cruel manner. Anne Askew may be the first recorded feminist in England, tortured to try and take down the Queen, and then burnt at the stake as a heretic. Her story is one that has been remembered through time as one of inspirational courage and bravery in the face of actions of cruel men, and her legacy lives on. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.